There's a silent belief people carry in today's world. If someone isn't visible, they must lack confidence. If they're not sharing their face, their moments, their wins, something must be wrong with them. But what if the reality is completely different? What if the people who reveal the least are actually the ones who need approval the least? And what if empaths, the ones who truly understand human nature, are the very ones deliberately choosing to stay unseen? And if this video resonates with you, don't forget to like it because it helps bring this message to the people who genuinely need it. We live in a society where being noticed is often confused with being significant. The more attention you attract, the more relevant you seem. The more reactions you collect, the more real your existence starts to feel, not just to others, but even to yourself. Over time, this builds a quiet but convincing illusion. It persuades people that visibility equals worth, that if something goes unnotic, it somehow matters less. But this system carries a hidden weakness. It gradually trains people to hand over their identity to others. Instead of building a solid sense of self from the inside, people begin measuring themselves through external responses. Instead of asking, "Who am I when nobody is watching?" they start asking, "How am I coming across right now?" And that shift is not minor. It's deeply psychological. Because the moment your focus turns outward like that, you stop living from your inner experience and start adjusting yourself for outside approval. You begin filtering your personality, shaping your behavior, editing your life into something more appealing, more likable, more presentable. And without even noticing, you drift away from authenticity and closer to performance. That's the trade most people never even realize they're making. But empaths tend to recognize it. They sense how quickly attention turns addictive, how easily identity becomes dependent on on. And once they see that pattern clearly, they don't move toward it. They pause, not because they lack strength, but because they understand the price of connecting your self-worth to being seen. Empaths don't just consume content, they feel intention. Where most people scroll past a photo, a caption, or a video without looking deeper, an empath often picks up on what's lying beneath. Because for them, it's never simply about what is being displayed. It's about why it's being displayed. Where others notice a regular post, an empath may sense the emotional hunger behind it, the quiet longing to be acknowledged, the unspoken need for validation, the subtle comparison wrapped inside the presentation, the performance hiding within what looks like genuine expression. And this awareness isn't something they switch on and off. It's instinctive. They read tone. They notice energy. They pick up emotional signals most people miss entirely. And once you begin experiencing social media through hat lens, it stops feeling casual and light. It starts feeling heavy and layered. Every post begins to carry weight. Every interaction starts to feel like an exchange, not necessarily dishonest, but emotionally charged. Because beneath the surface, there's often a transaction taking place. Attention for approval, visibility for reassurance, expression for reaction. And empaths feel that dynamic as it unfolds. For someone who already processes emotions intensely, this constant exposure becomes exhausting. It's not just scrolling anymore. It's absorbing intentions, absorbing energy, absorbing emotional signals from dozens, sometimes hundreds of people at once. And gradually, that accumulates, not as obvious tension, but as quiet depletion. The kind that doesn't come from doing too much, but from feeling too much, too often, without rest. Here's what most people fail to understand. For an empath, visibility isn't harmless. It's not simply posting or being seen in a neutral, uncomplicated way. Because the moment you become visible, you also become open to interpretation. And being interpreted is never straightforward. It gets filtered through other people's minds, their insecurities, their histories, their assumptions, their state of mind, which means every time something is shared, it doesn't remain unchanged. It enters multiple psychological spaces simultaneously. It becomes part of someone's comparison, someone's envy, someone's silent criticism, someone's projection, someone's misreading. And most people never think about this. They post and move forward, but empaths don't experience it that way. They feel the weight of those invisible reactions, not one by one, but all together. It's like an unseen pressure, not sharp enough to catch immediately, but consistent enough to wear you down slowly. And this is where most people misread the situation. They assume empaths avoid visibility because they're afraid, but it's not about fear. It's about understanding. Empaths recognize something others tend to miss. That attention is not always harmless, and being seen is not always emotionally safe. So instead of asking, why don't they share more? A more honest question is, how much are they consciously choosing not to take in? Because sometimes staying hidden isn't about fear. It's about keeping your inner world from being crowded with other people's perceptions. Most people construct an image. Not necessarily dishonest, but carefully built, adjusted, refined, designed to be received in a particular way. Empaths, by contrast, tend to operate differently. They are less focused on building an image and more committed to preserving a reality. A reality that feels steady inside them, even when no one is paying attention. That's the genuine difference. Because the moment your identity begins depending on reactions, likes, comments, approval, attention, validation, you gradually start losing ownership of it. Your sense of self stops being rooted internally and begins shifting based on the outside world. And when that happens, something quiet but significant breaks. Your confidence is no longer steady. It climbs when people respond well and falls when they don't. Your peace is no longer constant. It becomes conditional, shaped by how the world is reacting to you on any particular day. And your self-worth slowly becomes something public, something measurable, something observable, something shaped by people who don't truly know you. That's an unstable way to live, even if it doesn't feel that way in the beginning. Empaths often detect this risk early, not always through reasoning, but through emotional sensitivity. They can feel how rapidly identity becomes shaky when it is continuously exposed to outside feedback. So, instead of leaning into that system, they quietly step back from it. Not entirely disconnected, not emotionally shut down, just less reliant. They choose something most people don't even register as a choice. Why choose to exist without constant feedback loops? Without needing every single moment approved? Part 2 rewrite, same length, same structure, same meaning. Without needing every thought confirmed. Without turning identity into something that must be continuously validated by the outside world. And in that space, something meaningful begins to take shape. A calmer sense of self, a more stable identity, one that doesn't wobble every time attention moves elsewhere. And that is where genuine psychological strength begins to emerge. As empaths develop, something quiet but significant begins to shift within them. Clears throat. It rarely happens all at once. It happens through experience, reflection, and emotional growth accumulated over time. And because of that process, they don't grow distant from people. They become selective about access. There's a real distinction there. Distant means disconnected. Selective means deliberate. They begin recognizing something most people almost never stop to consider. Not everything meaningful requires exposure. Some moments lose their weight when they are converted into content. Some emotions lose their genuineness when they are converted into performance. Some experiences feel less real when they are constantly observed rather than fully lived. And gradually, a deeper understanding develops. Not everything real requires an audience. Some things are whole on their own. They don't need validation, documentation, or outside confirmation to carry meaning. And perhaps the most significant realization of all, Not everything precious survives constant exposure, because the more something is open to outside interpretation, the more it becomes shaped by opinions, assumptions, and projections. And empaths feel that transformation very clearly. So, rather than overexposing their lives, they begin to withdraw. Not from people, not from genuine connection, not from relationships, but from unnecessary access. They begin deciding what belongs in the private space of personal experience and what, if anything, belongs in the public space of perception. This isn't withdrawal, it's refinement. A way of sorting what deserves outside attention from what deserves to stay untouched, unedited, and completely experienced. And with time, this becomes a form of emotional wisdom, because they start to understand that privacy is not a void, it is a shield. Protection of inner peace, protection of meaning, protection of experiences that lose something the instant they are turned into performance. So, when empaths grow more private as they mature, it's not because they are retreating from life. It's because they are choosing to keep certain parts of life whole. Privacy is frequently misunderstood in today's world, because in a culture centered on visibility, anything less than constant sharing gets quickly judged. People tend to describe it in surface-level terms: insecurity, avoidance, hiding, emotional shutdown. But those descriptions, usually miss the deeper psychology underneath. For empaths especially, privacy is not about running from the world. It's about taking ownership of their relationship with it, because they understand something most people overlook. The moment you become visible, you are no longer simply seen, you are interpreted. And interpretation is never unbiased. People don't perceive you as you actually are. They perceive you through their own filter, their past experiences, their assumptions, their emotional state, their comparisons, their projections. And that means part of you stops belonging entirely to yourself. This is where privacy becomes essential, not as a defensive wall, but as a deliberate choice. It becomes the ability to decide three fundamental things: who gets to see you, how they are allowed to perceive you, and how much of your inner world they are given access to. That level of ownership transforms everything, because rather than remaining constantly open to interpretation, and by everyone, you begin choosing where your energy, identity, and presence are invested. And that's not fear, it's clarity. It's not avoidance, it's discernment. It's not hiding, it's psychological growth. Empaths frequently reach this understanding through lived experience. They come to see that unlimited access doesn't build deeper connection. It often creates distortion. So, they begin to value selective visibility, not because they want to vanish, but because they want to remain whole. And in that choice, privacy stops being something defensive. It becomes something wise. A quiet decision to guard the parts of yourself that lose their clarity when exposed too frequently to the world's interpretations. There's something most people rarely take a moment to consider. Not everyone observing you carries good intentions. In a world where visibility is everywhere, observation becomes automatic. But the intention behind that observation differs greatly. Some people don't watch you to understand you, they watch to measure themselves against you. Others are not observing to connect, they are observing to silently compete. And some have no genuine interest in your story at all. They are searching for flaws, vulnerabilities, contradictions, small things they can use, judge, or hold on to mentally. And this is the part most people don't fully grasp until life teaches it to them firsthand. Empaths, however, tend to sense this layer more acutely. Not because they are suspicious, but because they are perceptive. They detect emotional undercurrents that most people consistently overlook. And gradually, through real situations, not abstract ideas, they begin to absorb a difficult truth about visibility, especially after experiences like betrayal, after being deeply misread, after trusting someone who mishandled that trust emotionally, after realizing that openness doesn't always come back in the same form it was extended. Something within them transforms. They stop treating visible Ility as something casual or thoughtless. What once felt effortless, sharing, expressing, being emotionally open, begins to feel more deliberate, more measured, more conscious. And gradually, visibility stops feeling like expression and starts feeling like exposure, because exposure means more than simply being seen. It means being available to interpretation without any control over how that interpretation unfolds. And once an empath truly grasps that difference, their behavior shifts. They don't disappear, they don't isolate, but they become significantly more thoughtful about what they reveal, when they reveal it, and to whom. Because they understand that not all attention is safe, and not all visibility leads to genuine connection. Sometimes it leads to distortion, and that understanding changes how they navigate the world. Here's the deeper transformation that most people don't consciously register. Empaths tend to gravitate towards something simple, but powerful. They choose livy, life, over broadcasting it. While so much of modern behavior revolves around being seen, captured, and validated through outside feedback, empaths typically operate from an entirely different internal compass. Because in most situations, the question people carry has quietly changed over time. Rather than being completely present in a moment, many people now unconsciously wonder, how will this appear? How will it translate on social media? How will others read it? How will it land once it is shared? But empaths naturally lean toward a different question altogether. How does this actually feel? And that small internal difference changes everything about how they experience life, because feeling demands complete presence, and presence requires undivided attention. The moment you begin capturing life for outside consumption, something subtle starts to occur. You are still physically there, but mentally, a part of you detaches from the moment. A part of you shifts into observer mode. Rather than full participation, you begin framing the experience rather than completely immersing in it. And empaths are often deeply sensitive to this internal division. They can feel when attention is split between genuine experience and outward performance. When life is no longer simply being lived, but also being managed for outside perception. So, rather than remaining in that divided state, they choose presence. Complete, unfiltered, undistracted presence. And presence is something social media cannot genuinely reward, because presence is not about how something registers after it is shared. It is about how deeply it is felt while it is still happening. And for empaths, that depth carries far more weight than visibility ever could. Most empaths were not always this private. In fact, many of them began on the complete opposite end of the spectrum. They used to share more openly, trust more freely, express themselves without second-guessing, and show pieces of their inner world without considering the consequences too carefully. Because at that point, openness feels natural. It feels like real connection. It feels like honesty. It feels like emotional security. But life has a way of quietly reshaping that over time. Through experiences that aren't always dramatic, but leave a deep mark. Moments of being misunderstood, situations where sincerity was misinterpreted, times when vulnerability was not met with care, or when trust was offered to people who didn't honor it with the same intention. And slowly, a realization begins to settle. Not everyone deserves that level of access. Not everyone can carry what you share with the same care you offered it. And that understanding shifts everything on the inside. Because once an empath truly absorbs this lesson, their character doesn't harden, it sharpens. They don't become cold or withdrawn, they become precise. Their openness is no longer reflexive. It becomes intentional. Their trust is no longer given instantly. It becomes something that has to be earned. And their emotional availability is no longer boundless. It becomes directed toward where it is genuinely valued. They stop offering themselves freely in spaces where their presence goes unnoticed or underappreciated. Not from bitterness, but from clarity. because they begin to understand that energy, attention, and emotional depth are not things to be scattered carelessly. They are internal resources that shape identity, peace, and emotional health. And once that awareness takes root, their behavior shifts naturally. They choose where they invest their energy more carefully. They choose who receives access more deliberately. They choose how much of themselves is shared more thoughtfully. And this is where real discernment is born. Not from detachment, but from experience, from pain that has been learned from rather than repeated. And in that evolution, the empath doesn't lose their openness. They simply learn how to safeguard it